Hey all, it's Mooch. Welcome to Minding mAhs episode that. Today we're going to talk about battery myths and battery facts. And for a lot of myths, there's often some fact mixed in with it, but it's just been applied too generally. And it turns into a myth when you take something that only applies to a specific situation and said it applies for all. But let's dive in. And number one for the myths is, and I can't remember all of them, so I got to cheat here. Dropping one of our batteries, lithium-ion batteries, into water can cause it to explode. That's a myth because, number one, our batteries are hermetically sealed. Water can't get in. It's sealed, so the stuff that's inside can't get out. And also, inside our rechargeable, what they call secondary lithium-ion batteries, there is no metallic lithium that can react with water. Water's not a problem if the case gets opened up or something like that. It's only non-rechargeable, what they call lithium metal batteries, that there's a problem if the case, the metal can, is opened up and water gets inside. So we don't have to worry about that. Myth number two, you must replace your batteries every whatever number of months. It depends on how you use them. If you've got a 20 amp battery and you're using them at 5 amps and you never get them hot, you don't recharge them when they're cold, you're not abusing them somehow, they never get short-circuited, they could last 3, 4, 5 years. But if you're someone who's really running those batteries really hard, you might find that the performance really starts dropping in 2 or 3 months. So you don't have to replace them on a set schedule. Replace them when the performance starts to piss you off, starts to drop, or the wraps are starting to get beat up, the metal can itself is getting dented, which is a bad thing, or anything else physically is happening to the battery, or you think it's acting weird. So use your specifics. Now, some people just say, hey, every Christmas I'm going to get new batteries. That's okay, but you don't have to do that. Myth number three, you must never ever use your battery below 3.4 or 3.2 volts or something like that. If you put your battery on the charger and it says 3.2, 3, 2.8, that's not a problem. If you're just listening, please read the screen. If you want a little bit more battery life, most mods and most mech users stop around 3.2 volts, so it rises back up a little bit. By the time you take it out of the mod and put it in the charger, it's around 3.6 volts. That's fine. You get a little extra battery life by staying above 2.8, 3 volts or so. Battery myth number four. We can use our batteries as hard as we want as long as they don't get hot, whatever definition of hot is for you. That's a myth because what goes on inside the battery is very different from what we feel on the outside, especially through a plastic wrap. Holding the metal can itself, battery might feel a lot harder than when you're holding it through the wrap. Inside the battery, there are hot spots, the areas that create the heat. Now, some of the heat comes from all through the battery, just from the resistance of the compounds and the liquid and stuff that's inside the battery, tiny bit of liquid. It's certain spots it gets concentrated, like you've got the spiral of all the goop and all the different layers, and the little aluminum tabs, or copper tabs, coming off that get spot welded to the top and bottom of the battery and the inside. That concentrates all the current. The spot welds for those can get very hot. So just going by, oh, the outside of the battery, it's just really warm, there's no problem. We're inside, it's going to be really fracking hot. We can't use that as a judge for how hard we're using the battery, especially when we're pulsing it, because those pulses can create tremendous local temperature rises, and that starts accelerating the age of the battery. But by the time that very hot spot reaches the outside, the battery is just warm. So you still have to go by the current rating of the battery and other capabilities the battery might have to judge how hard you want to use it, especially with like a short circuit. A short circuit can pop a battery, can cause it to burst and catch fire in a second or two. That battery will not get hot if there's a hard enough short causing problems inside the battery. Myth number five, we must occasionally fully discharge and recharge the batteries to keep them at their optimum performance level. That's only true occasionally for the nickel chemistries, the 1.2 volt nickel metal hydride or nickel cadmium batteries. Not used nearly as often anymore, more of a niche for very specific applications where those batteries are just the best performers. So for us, you never need to do that. You don't have to bring your battery down all the way and bring it up all the way, unless you're checking capacity or something like that. Now, for phones, tablets, laptops, things that have battery percentage counters, with a fixed internal battery, you can get better performance by bringing the battery all the way down to 0% and charging it all the way up to 100% for 24 hours, because you're actually resetting, recalibrating the battery percentage counting chip. It's not benefiting the battery. You're telling the chip, hey, you're kind of drifting a little bit, because these chips might be 1% accurate. Well, if your number drifts 1% every month or so, in a few months you could be off a bunch, and some of them drift a lot faster than that. So by telling the chip what is fully empty and what's completely full, by discharging all the way and recharging all the way, you can recalibrate the chip and go, oh, okay, I got this. And now you'll get more accurate readings from your phone, your tablet, or your laptop. Myth number 6, lithium-ion batteries need to be broken in, quote unquote, for best performance. Not true. Lithium-ion batteries are ready to rock immediately. You can charge them, you can not charge them, just go ahead and use them. Now, light bulbs have a reputation for this. Now, if you've got a lithium-ion battery that's been sitting around for months, years, there can be oxidation layers inside built up, and cycling it once or twice can get rid of those. But if that hasn't happened, you don't need to break it in. Now, there may be some factory out there that's putting out some crap cells where they don't complete what's called the formation process, the process of charging and discharging under very specific conditions when the battery is made, and it sets up some layers inside the battery. It's really critical that these are done well, but it takes a long time, and it's one of the most expensive and time-consuming parts of making a battery. There may be factories out there that are skipping this process or just doing it partially, figuring, our customers can do that for us, no problems. Well, for that, you might see an increase in performance. I don't know which cells might do that. I haven't seen that in any round cells, especially not from Samsung, Sony, LG, Panasonic, Molicel, Lishan, ATL, BAK, any of these other big manufacturers. Don't have to worry about doing that. But for an unknown manufacturer, for a LiPo or something like that, perhaps. So actually, you know what? I'll call this one a tiny bit fact, but 99% myth. Myth number 7, you can use certain chargers to refresh or recondition our batteries. This ties in with number 6. It's not true. Lithium-ion batteries, unless they've been stored for a couple of years, don't need refreshing or reviving. Now, if you're talking about like a 0-volt battery or something, anything under 2.5 volts, don't revive it. Don't recondition it. Don't try to get it back. It's gone. It's dead. Leave it alone. Recycle it. Give it a nice burial. Say some nice words. Invite the family. Have a great meal afterwards. It's gone. These batteries can be damaged when they go below 2. Why am I having so much trouble talking tonight? They can be damaged when you go below 2.5 volts. So I don't recommend trying to revive anything. And you can't refresh them unless they've been stored for a couple of years and these certain layers have built up. Don't make it a big part of what you do, what you look for in a charger. If you're using the battery, you're fine. That's going to take care of any problems. If you got batteries that's sitting for a couple of years, see what happens when you use it, and then just use it again. That'll do the same thing the charger does for the refresh cycle or reconditioning cycle. Myth number 8, you can increase the life of a lithium-ion battery by storing it in the refrigerator. Batteries hate to be stored. They sit there just aging away. They like being used. If you've got 20 batteries and you're only using 10 of them, it's better to rotate through all 20 so you don't have to remember which ones are charged, not charged, you don't have to check voltages, than to keep 10 in storage, checking their voltages every couple of months, and using 10. Just cycle through them all. Put it in the refrigerator. There's really just not much of a difference between your 80-degree room and your 40-degree refrigerator. It just doesn't make a difference. And you've got to worry about condensation, whatever else might happen there. Definitely don't freeze them. If you try to charge a battery that's frozen, you can do some nasty things inside the battery. It becomes a safety hazard. Myth number 9, the best battery is fill in the blank. There's no such thing as a best battery. There might be great or even best all-around batteries, but that means it's not the best at anything, one thing in particular. It's about the best for a specific purpose. The best battery for a single battery mod being run over 75 watts. You know, Samsung 30T or something like that. The best battery for a mech when your priority is hardest hitting, Samsung 30T. So there are best batteries for specific kind of setups, but I'm asked, wow, a lot of times every day, what's the best battery? And I can't answer. I have to give them a bunch. And I know you just want one number, one freaking word. It doesn't exist. My recommended batteries tables, link down in the description for my blog at ECF, and you can find my ratings tables, my recommended batteries tables, and just 1 minute to look up, oh, okay, you know, I'm at this wattage level or so. These are a couple of batteries I can look for. I don't like to give just one to look for, because what if you can't find it? And in a lot of countries, particularly in Asia, the batteries that I'm recommending just aren't available. So yes, it's a little more time to look for the battery, but you end up getting one that's tailored for exactly what you need and not some generic, oh, this is the best battery. Myth number 10, batteries will warn you before they explode. This is a myth, an important one. A short circuit can cause superheating, a hot spot inside the battery, and start forcing into thermal runaway before the outside heats up even 1 degree. This can happen in a second or two with a hard short circuit. You cannot say, I am safe, just because your battery isn't getting hot as hell. Now, you're certainly not safe if your battery's getting hot as hell. Stop, slow down. Look for a short circuit or slow down your vaping. But never assume that a battery is going to get hot and give you a warning before it explodes, because a short circuit will happen too fast for that. Myth number 11, batteries are, quote, safe. And I've been touching on this a little bit here. If you stay under their continuous current rating. No use of these lithium-ion round batteries is safe, quote unquote. There's always some risk. These batteries were never meant to be used outside of a fully protected battery pack, both physically and electronically. I mean, why else would there be positive and negative on the top with just a tiny little bit of plastic? We all complained about how thin and ridiculous the wraps are. That's because they're never meant to be handled by human hands, except for when they're assembled into a battery pack and then sealed away. So I know the word safe is just an expedient way of saying, well, you know, as safe as we can make it, but I think it's led to a lot of complacency in the community. When the word safe is thrown around, the people go, well, I don't have to worry about anything now. No, you still have to worry about wraps. You still have to worry about the very rare charger failure or mod failure or an auto fire situation or a mech going on from your pocket or just putting a battery in your pocket with keys or change. There's still safety concerns that are out there. So we don't have to be afraid of these batteries, but respect the power they have and just realize you just still have to practice some safety no matter what's going on, no matter how far you are under the continuous current rating. Numero 12. You can use the max or pulse rating since we pulse our batteries when we vape. You don't have to worry about the continuous current rating. Well, number one, there's no standard. That's a myth. Number one, there is no standard for a max or pulse rating. So how do we know what it applies to? How can we apply it? How long are the pulses? How long in between? You know, if a battery's got a 40 amp pulse rating, oh, so I can pulse it at 40 amps for 3 seconds every 4 seconds, and there's no problem, right? No. And what happens if there's an auto fire or an accidental button press in a mechanical mod? Now we're running it continuously at that 40 amps. So this is why I always recommend using the continuous current rating. There are no standards for pulses. There are no standard for max. If it's a temperature limited rating, excuse me, like some batteries have, like Sony VTCs and a couple of Moly cells, where they say, hey, you know, you can run it at 40 amps, just keep the temperature below something really hot, usually like 75 degrees Celsius. That's hot as hell. I mean, you can't hold that battery. We can go, oh, okay, that's easy. Just remember, if there's an auto fire situation or a failing mod or an accidental button press, you can be running that battery continuously at that level, and that increases your risk. So I always recommend staying in the continuous current rating, just buying a better battery, because it extends the life of the battery, it reduces your risk, and it just makes it an easier, safer way to vape. And we've got enough things to have to worry about. Myth number 13, double wrapping a battery insulates it and makes it too hot. In my testing, adding a second wrapper on a battery only increases the temperature by about like 3 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Fahrenheit or something. It doesn't fundamentally change the safety of the battery. Now, it might make it not fit in a lot of mods, especially tight-fitting tube mechs. You could push it in there and have a hell of a time trying to get it back out. So electrically or safety-wise, it doesn't make a difference. In fact, it might increase safety because now you've got double wraps on there. But it could be a problem physically in fitting in certain mods. And if it ends up in a device where the two batteries now are crushed together, well, that's not good because that increases the abrasion between those two batteries. If one of them's got a slit or a nick or something in the wrap and you're jamming them together hard, there might be problems. I don't know. So just don't force them into any mods if you double wrap your batteries. Myth number 14. Batteries' internal protection devices will prevent it from exploding. No, because then we would never see exploding batteries in any of these videos that are so popular on YouTube. There are internal protection devices in a lot of batteries, like 18650s. One of them is called the CID, Current Interrupt Device. It's literally a physical circuit breaker, not electrical, for pressure. As, let's say you're abusing the battery, really abusing it hard, and you're actually starting to boil off or increase the vapor pressure from the liquid inside there, or some of the compounds inside the battery starting to decompose, which is usually around 75, 80 degrees Celsius inside. The outside of the battery may not be that hot. Those extra gases create pressure. The CID, current interrupt device, at a certain point, the pressure will pop it. And you can actually hear the thing click when this happens and open like a circuit breaker would to disconnect the current. The battery's dead. Don't go to YouTube to find the video that tells you how to stick a screwdriver under the top contact to reset the circuit breaker. It popped for a reason. The battery is damaged. Have the wake, say nice words, have a party, go out to dinner, recycle and replace that battery. It's gone. The other protection device that's in, as I understand it, only the lower current rated, higher capacity batteries, it's called a PTC, positive temperature coefficient. It is not pressure, temperature, who knows what that you might see out there. That's a marketing use of PTC. Positive thermal coefficient or positive temperature coefficient. It's a disc that looks a lot like the top ring insulators that we need to keep in good shape on our batteries, but this is inside between the top contact of the battery and a little part of the venting disc below it. And what happens is if you heat up the battery hot enough, it changes from a low resistance compound to a very high resistance one and limits the current flow. So this one doesn't work on pressure, it works just on temperature. But because it does have some resistance on its own, I'm told by people in the industry that a lot of the higher performance batteries do not have the PTC protection device in it. But no matter what's in or not in your battery, do not depend on it to save you from short circuits or something like that. We still need to know what's going on. We still need to keep our wraps in good shape, not use the batteries at preposterously high levels, etc. and so forth. Good charging practices, not carrying it in our pocket, etc. Myth 15, only pulse testing a battery is valid since we pulse when vaping. Now I've heard this for the 4.5 years I've been testing batteries to the vaping community. Pulse testing a battery, well, number one, how do you pulse test it? 2 seconds every 2 minutes, 5 seconds every 30 seconds. Those will give you different numbers for the battery. In order to since there is no standard for pulse testing, how do you compare one battery to the next, number one? But let's say I was going to do only pulse testing. I've done the comparisons. For a battery, vaping 2 seconds, 3, 5 seconds, that's continuous use of 2 seconds, 3 seconds, or 5 seconds. Anything more than a few, I don't know why I can't talk tonight. Anything more than a few milliseconds long is considered continuous by a battery. If you run the battery for 1 hour, that's a 1 hour pulse. If you run it for 2 seconds, that's a 2 second pulse. But for the battery, they're all the same things, just different lengths of time. It only takes a few milliseconds for all the ions to stack themselves up, getting whatever gradients and distributions around the battery. Then after that, it's the battery just chugging away all the same thing. And I've done the tests. There was only like a couple % difference between true pulse testing of a couple of seconds and a continuous discharge. The batteries that perform the best when discharged continuously are the batteries that perform the best when they're just pulsed, and the other way around. Continuous discharging is also the industry standard. It's a way to directly compare one battery to the next, because 4.2 to 2.5 volts at this current level, that can be duplicated by anybody. Pulse testing, now you've got all these other variables you have to deal with, and you can't directly compare one battery to the next. Or certainly, maybe I did all pulse testing, I can't compare those results to anything you get from the major manufacturers, because none of them do pulse testing. So you can use continuous current testing as a comparison, a way to compare the performance of batteries. It's also the only way that we can start to set up safety limits. Because if you have a battery in your pocket short-circuiting, which will probably blow it up, but let's say you've got a malfunctioning mech, the button's being pressed all the time, or an auto-firing regulated mod, it's being discharged continuously. And you'll want to know, okay, I've got a mech, I'm worried about it, maybe shorting out sometime. What's the lowest resistance I can use? Well, you can use a resistance that gives you the continuous current rating. Now you know, even if you have a failure of the mech and the button gets stuck or fires in your pocket or something like that, your battery's only going to get discharged at its rating. You've got a little bit of a safety margin there. So you can use continuous current for performance checking, for safety checking. We don't need to pulse our batteries in testing to find out how they're going to perform. Myth number 16, you can rejuvenate a battery by pulse charging it. Now, there are a couple of papers out there, industry papers, research papers, where pulse charging under very specific circumstances, the charger and the batteries being charged are matched. There can be some benefit to that. Not a lot, but there can be some benefit. I've seen that for electric vehicle, fast charging and things like that. It may be as much for thermal reasons. Charge it like crazy, back off a little bit so you can get some cooling, charge like crazy. But it's matched to the battery. A pulse charger for our batteries, where the battery can change at any time and without some kind of research the company has done, no, that's not giving us any kind of benefit versus just using continuous current, the standard charging method that has worked and there's so much data on. Now, you also get partial myths, where I mentioned this a little beginning. You've got some fact in there as part of the myth, but that fact for a specific circumstance has been extrapolated, generalized to cover the whole broader thing, and now it becomes a myth because it's just not true for this big picture. It's only true for these little things, like pulse charging. If you got this matched electric vehicle pack charger combination and they've done some testing and they found the perfect sequence of pulses that can charge that battery, hey, we're golden. But you can't just say pulse charging is good for vaping batteries, and any vaping battery for any charger. So partial myth number 1, defective batteries are a big cause of the accidents we see. The ones batteries catching fire, chargers burning, something like that. For the major manufacturers, Samsung, Sony, LG, Panasonic, Sanyo, Molicel, others, the defect rate, the most often quoted defect rate, is 1 in 1 million cells. 1 in a million. That's tiny. We may have never seen a defective Sony battery. I think we've probably used 1 million Sonys, so maybe there's one out there. Now, for the China factories, the smaller China factories that are churning out tons of batteries for the vaping market, we don't know their safety data. But we can't go and say they're the big cause of the accidents, because the data for the big manufacturers is not there, and we have no idea what the safety record is for the smaller China factories. Now, the big China factories I'm not too worried about. Lishan, ATL, BAK, who supply millions and millions and millions of batteries worldwide every year. And their customers aren't going to accept all their products blowing up. But for the smaller factories, perhaps. But again, there's a little bit of truth, but we can't generalize it to say we've got a big problem with defective batteries in the vaping community. It's us that's making these batteries blow up. My personal opinion. Partial myth number 2. Using a battery too hard can cause it to explode. Well, if you short circuit it, or if you use it so hard the battery thinks it's a short circuit, well, yeah, then you can cause it to explode. But using a 25 amp rated battery at 30 amps isn't going to make it explode, that on its own. It's going to shorten the life of the battery. It's going to give you crappy performance from excessive voltage sag, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't make it explode. A continuous current rating isn't the explosion point. 25 amp battery will not explode at 26 amps. It'll last, it's being stressed a little bit harder. At 27 amps, it's being stressed even harder, etc. and so forth. And the risks go higher and higher. The battery life gets affected more and more as the current goes up. But we can't just assign safe, unsafe, this need to have a dividing line just to make things easy for us. It just doesn't exist for so many things with batteries. So it's partially true that because if you use it too hard by short-circuiting a battery, it will explode, but we just can't generalize it and say using a battery hard will make it explode. Partial myth number 3, using a battery for too long, for too many cycles, charge-discharge cycles, can cause it to explode. No, it just causes it to lose more and more and more capacity. But the internal resistance can go up, which cause more heating of the battery. And if we start using it really, really hard, or we start doing really crappy charging every single time, like we charge when the battery's really cold, or we charge it way too hard, 5 amps, 6 amps, or something like that, there's your little bit of fact. That can start setting up damage that eventually might cause that battery to go into thermal runaway and make it explode. But just using a battery for too long, for hundreds of cycles, is not going to be the cause of this battery exploding. It'll be the cause of it losing more and more and more performance. And if you keep pushing it or keep abusing it in certain ways, then there's a chance that damage can turn into something to force it into thermal runaway. Partial myth number 4, discharging a battery too far down can cause it to explode. 2.5 volts is the limit. Now, if you start going below that, you can start causing different types of damage. You start going below 2 volts or so, some batteries can actually start dissolving their own copper that's inside. There's a copper foil as one of the layers for the spiral wrap that's inside the battery. Well, that copper can start dissolving into the liquid. And when you recharge the battery, if you leave it there long enough at a low voltage, when you recharge the battery, that copper will now deposit itself wherever it happens to be. That can start building up and become a problem because now you've got metal where there's not supposed to be metal inside a battery, and that could potentially eventually lead to a short circuit. So just discharging it down too low is not a problem. If you find you had your mech and you brought your battery down to 2.3 volts or something, just recharge it right away. Just get it up to 3 volts or something like that right away. Don't leave it down there. But if you pull a battery out of a closet and you're like, whoa, this has been in there for 2 years, and you find it's at 2 volts, 1.5 volts, something, don't use it because it's just been sitting there damaging itself, and you don't want to recharge that and take a chance. So, partial myth. There are circumstances where discharging a battery is too low, but just bring it down there quickly and going, whoops, I made a mistake, and bring it back up. I'm not too worried about that. But if you're not worried at all, just recycle and replace the battery if you go below 2.5 volts. Anything above that, there's no problem. They're rated for that, assuming the the wraps are in good condition, etc. and so forth. Partial myth number 5. You can safely discharge your batteries and get them ready for disposal or recycling by putting them in salt water. No, you can't. The fact part is you can discharge them in salt water, but the thing is that causes electrolysis. Unbelievably rapid corrosion of metals. I've done this with round cells, and the top contact of the battery actually dissolved and disappeared before the battery had discharged itself. It does not safely discharge your batteries. It just makes them dissolve. And that battery stayed warm for 2 days, slowly discharging itself with the salt water that seeped inside. This is not safe. If you do it with a LiPo, you're dissolving the tabs, the contacts there, and there's still charge left inside the battery. Just wrap the ends to cover up the terminals. If it's a LiPo, wherever you have to wrap to prevent any electrical exposure, and to recycle and replace the battery. Do not try to discharge them in salt water. Yes, the fact part is they will discharge, but it just can't be done safely. And it creates unbelievably toxic water, and it smells like hell. It's just really nasty. That's the end of our partial myths. It's time to go on to facts. Now, these facts were something I brought up like 4 years ago, and they still haven't changed yet. And I don't think they're going to change soon. And at least now, because you know, I never know, something could happen. But at least as of August 2019, there was almost no round battery we use with a true rating over 35 amps. That's it. Samsung 30T, 35 amps, everything else is 30 amps and lower. If you see a higher number, it's some bullshit max or pulse rating that's utterly and completely useless, or they're just flat out lying about the capability of it. Now I say almost because there are a couple of lithium ferrous phosphate, LiFePO4 batteries, like from A123, and Vapcell rewraps another one, a beautiful bright red wrap, that have ratings above 35 amps. They're somewhere in about the 50 amp range or so for a continuous rating. I think it's 55 amps. But LFP chemistry, lithium ferrous phosphate, is charged to 3.6 volts. And when used hard, you're down around like 2.8 volts. And you're going to run it down to like 2.5 or something like that. So you can't use them in a regulated mod unless you have a DNA mod and eScribe to set the cutoff voltage very, very low. But you can use them maybe in a stacked mech. And I think some folks in Germany are using these LFP chemistry 28650s stacked in a mech. So you've got 5 to 6 volts or something like that in the mech, but they can use them at 50, 55 amps. But otherwise, for anything that we commonly use, no, nothing over 35 amps. Next fact, there's no 18650 with a true rating over 30 amps. None. None. Every single day, people, dozens of times a day, hey Mooch, I know you say nothing over 30, but what about this? No. I only have to look at it. No. What about this battery? No. 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 It does not exist. Now, when it does, I will tell the entire planet and say, hey, everything's changed. We got a 35 amp 18650. But right now, no. You can just say, hey, it's over 35 amp. That's a bullshit rating or some max or pulse rating they're trying to pass off as the rating. There is no 3000 mAh 18650 rated over 20 amps. That's it. If it's 3000 mAh, it is 20 amps or 15 amps. Now, got the nice little asterisks here because the home life battery uses a nominal rating of 3077 mAh. Now, the other 3000 mAh batteries, the VTC6, HG2, the 30Q, those also have mAh ratings that high, but they set their nominal number lower. They have namely a bigger space, more room between their rating, their guaranteed rating, and what all the batteries is. So the other batteries are just as high, but Home Life uses their statistics and their numbers to come up with this number for it, but the other companies just round down to 3000 mAh. So if you see a 3000 mAh battery that's rated 25, 30, 35, or any number higher, I think I've seen 60, no, forget it. It's not true. There is no over 3000 mAh battery that's 3100 to 3600 mAh 18650 rated over 10 amps. If it's over 3000 mAh, not 3000 mAh, over 3000 mAh, and an 18650, it's going to be 8 to 10 amps, period. And it could be 2 or 3 amps. There's some high capacity batteries out there with very, very low current ratings. Well, the Home Life is over 3000 mAh. I'm sorry. It's because the Home Life does have a 3077 mAh rating here. There's no 18650 with a capacity over 3600. So that Trustfire or Ultrafire 9900 mAh battery, sorry, it's total bullshit. It's probably not even 1/3 that. It's probably like 1000 mAh, 69-cent battery that they wrapped up. 3600 mAh, that's it. And I haven't seen those available anywhere. It's a Panasonic. I've seen the 3400 mAh and the 3500 mAh LGs, but I haven't seen the 3600s for sale. It's just a rumor that it's out there. And last, there is no round battery we use that's rated over 5500 mAh, and that's the 26650s. So if you've got, because this one here was 18650, nothing over 3600 mAh. But for any battery we use, 5500 mAh is the max. I don't see a lot of exaggerated capacities though with the 26650s because they have pretty good numbers already. It's usually some of the really silly things on eBay or or I don't think it's Amazon anymore, but I forgot, AliExpress, Fast Tech, or places where they have these monstrous, 9,000 mAh 18650s, and it's just ridiculous. And that's it. Our myths, our partial myths, and our facts. Thank you for watching.